I might be back here at Family HQ, but we've still got loads of great interviews for you from Nursery World. This next one is with Wendy Usher from Inclusion Training for All. We talked all about the importance of inclusion, how you can make sure you're being inclusive even when you're on a budget, and she gave so many great examples about how you can think more inclusively in your practice. Hope you enjoy. Just to start off with, I think it would be lovely if you could just tell us a little bit about your history with early years and who you are.
Okay, well, my name's Wendy Usher. I run a company called Inclusion Training for All, and that's only been running for a couple of years, but prior to that, for the last 10 years, we've had our business called The Play Doctors, where I was actually physically designing and manufacturing resources for children with cognitive disorders, so autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia and so on. And all of that was actually based on 35 years of experience of working both within early years, within education, and then I also ran and managed a number of voluntary organisations prior to starting up my own business. And all of that experience led to me writing my first book, and I'm 13 down now, so I've got 13 books I've written around autism, behaviour, around inclusion, around supporting language and development and communication. So yes, so I've got a lot of background in history, but I think one of the most important things for me is actually I'm a mum, and I've got 2 children who are grown up, and I have a 33-year-old, and my 33-year-old happens to have autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, learning difficulty, epilepsy, sensory integration disorder. So it's a combination between professional and personal experience that I come at it from real life. I'm not a theorist, I'm a practitioner, and I've been there, so I understand some of the difficulties that a lot of the practitioners here are facing.
So that's where the real passion for it comes from as well, because you've dealt with it firsthand.
Yeah, I'm kind of one of those people, if I was a stick of rock and you cut me in half, I'd have inclusion written all the way around.
And what do you think, I suppose, State of the Union style, what do you think the state of provision is in the UK at the moment for inclusion and for children who have additional needs?
It's getting better. Recognition is getting a lot better, and people really have a heart and a desire to be able to support inclusion. I think the difficulty is the same as it always has been and always will be, with funding and being able to find the right resources. But true inclusion truly doesn't have to cost the earth. It's actually thinking out of the box. I got a really favourite phrase of mine, and my phrase is, behaviour itself is a form of communication. And if that's the case, what's the communication behind the behaviour? And with inclusion, if we're taking a person-centred approach, then what you need to do is to be able to recognise where the children are and what they need, and then thinking about making reasonable adaptations can be so simple. It could be in the use of our language. So instead of using too many words, what I advise people is they think about how to sign a phrase. So say, for instance, it was going to be time for dinner, and they were signing it, you've only got 2 words. But instead, if you've got a child who's got cognitive processing difficulties, and you're saying to the child, hey, come on, Ben, got to sit at the table because it's time for dinner now. And if you don't have dinner, you're not going to play football afterwards. And it's too much. But if we're thinking about it from the child's perspective, how can we simplify things down? And there's an acronym I use a lot, which is KISS. And KISS our children, very simple to remember, but it just stands for keep it super simple. The world doesn't have to be complicated. You know, we don't need masses of equipment and masses of resources. If you've got a pen and a piece of paper to be able to visualise something to help the child have a cue or a clue into what you're trying to communicate, then actually the world is a different place.
That's brilliant. So I'm that simplicity, it's just about making sure that we communicate things in the way that is appropriate to that child, whether it's signs or us signing or visual cues, etc.
It's around, for me, it's around knowing about the child or the young person as much as we can garner. Now, you have your All About Me record, so you've got things about the doctors, about a diagnosis, maybe about likes, dislikes. But things that perhaps aren't there that need to be considered are going to be things like, Does the child have any sensory needs? Is there any sensitivities that you are aware of? What kind of calming do you use at home? Is it kind of a head, shoulders, knees and toes? Is it a bubble tube? Or is it something where in actual fact it's a hypo sensitivity? If you have a sensory need and you have hyper and hypo, so hypo low, hyper high. I have one of my granddaughters, she has hyposensitivity, which means that her body craves stimuli. If she's walking along a road, she doesn't get the same level of sensory input unless she's running. Or if she's swinging on a swing, she has to be the one upside down holding on by her toenails with her hair swinging on the ground to gain that same level. So to calm Rotendo, what you need to do is to be able to take her out into the playground. You put your hand on her head and you say, go for it, Ro, and she spins 20 times in one direction, 20 times in the other direction. She's self-stimulating, which actually gives her body sufficient stimulation to come back in to the room and then to be able to concentrate. So unless you know that, unless you find out about the individual children that you're working with, you could take Rotendo over into a corner, give her a quiet area, give her a book to read. None of that is actually going to help her unless you're responding to her individually. So taking a person-centered approach for me is really important.
I think that's a great example of a time when what we traditionally do for children who might be having behavioural problems or they are acting out, as you might say, that normal approach is completely the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, the acting out thing, I've got a story. When I was working with in early years, I'd got a young gentleman that seemed to be attacking his worker on a regular basis, but nobody could work out exactly why. And I was asked to go and do some observations, and after a period of time I noticed it was only ever happening on the days when the worker was wearing a bright red fleece. Now, the child didn't have the ability to say, I'm terribly sorry, but could you possibly take that red fleece off? It's really annoying me. So instead he tried to take it off her, which was then deemed to be an attack. So if we're hearing the child's voice, then we need to have a stand back and we need to observe to be able to listen to what their individual needs are, to learn more about them. But you've got to have a mind in inclusion, just to be able to open the box and to be willing to actually think in a very lateral way, and that you're going to get different approaches for different children.
So yeah, again, we're back at that same thing of behaviour being a form of communication. How do you compile this knowledge about a child? Well, you think deeply about their behaviour and then you can understand where it is that they might be trying to tell you by doing so.
Yes, I think that the behaviour itself, it's not solely behaviour, obviously. There are going to be other traits that you're going to be looking for. So say, for instance, with autism, within early years, you might see tippy-toe walking, or you might see very stiff fingers, or you might see repetitive behaviour, or echolalia. Have you come across echolalia? Echolalia, echo, copy, lalia, language. So can I just get you to repeat everything I do? So, hiya.
Hiya.
You all right?
All right.
Time to tidy up now.
Time to tidy up now.
Okay?
Okay.
So I've walked away believing that you're going to tidy up, but the reality is that all you've done is to copy what I've said. So therefore, actually, I am assuming that you understand, but the reality is not quite like that. So it's not just around behaviour. There may be specific traits that you're seeing, but behaviour to me is actually a form of communication, as I've just said. So it's getting behind that to be able to actually focus and to find out how you're going to be able to support the child. So the child with echolalia, as an example, obviously language isn't going to be the easiest thing to use with them, but instead, if you're going to use something that is going to be a visual image to help them understand, or an object of reference, or you're modelling the behaviour, that you're asking the child to be able to copy what you're doing, and then you stand back, observe, check that that's going on, and once you've checked and you know, then you can walk away and leave a child to it. But our role as practitioners is enablers. Our ultimate is to be able to bring young people to the best of their potential. And if we're not thinking around inclusion and we're not making reasonable adaptations in the way we're working, then we're not doing our job, because we're not actually going to allow these children to excel as much as they can.
I think that makes, again, the point so lucidly that it's about understanding the different aspects and how we can pull that together. So I guess a good question is, let's imagine I'm a new practitioner or a new manager into a setting, and I want to understand my children better. Perhaps I have a new cohort coming in. What are some of the steps that I can take to really deeply understand those children's needs beyond just my all about me form or the kind of existing conversations I've had?
Okay. I think observation for me is the key, and observing the child right at the very beginning, including the environment. Where do they go within the environment? Which areas do they like going? Map what their transitions are, where they're actually moving to. Be able to talk to the child if they've got the cognitive ability to do that, or even English as a second language. Don't just assume that you know, actually the child is there and the child has a voice. Sometimes I see with new practitioners is that they're so keen to be able to get all of their attainment targets dealt with and to be able to set the child up to be able to achieve. The setting up actually isn't the way that the child learns. So another key principle to me is actually considering the child's learning style. I know there's a debate at the moment within early years as to whether audio, visual or kinesthetic actually makes a difference in how a child learns. But over 35 years worth, I really do believe that the majority of children, once they come into early years, then they're going to be moving on from mouthing, from kinesthetic into visualization. And I have found that visualization is actually a really good way to be able to support. So if I was advising a worker who was coming into a setting, then I would say, have your eyes open. How can you hear the child's voice? Be aware of what you know about the child, but also be aware of what you don't know about the child, what might you need to know, and who holds that information. So parents are really important, and a plea from a parent of a child or now adult with disabilities: don't allow your parents to do that walk of shame when they come to the setting. When my Ellie was young, then it was walking across the playground and waiting for that, oh, Mrs. Usher, could I just have a quick word, please? Or parents actually thinking, oh yes, that's the mum of the child who bit mine. That's the mum of the child who makes all of that noise. All of that is actually really... It's a situation where, as a parent, why should you have any more understanding as to your child than anybody else? So sometimes parents have low self-esteem and low confidence levels because actually they're no more prepared than anybody else. So we just, as a practitioner, as a new practitioner, be able to think about the positives. What can that child do? What can you praise them? And if the child is a constant fidgeter or a constant jumping or constant running, then you could introduce a subject and say, hey, do you know your Ben is the best jumper that we've got in the whole of the session, in the whole of the setting? So the parent says, yeah, he jumps at home, he jumps from the top of the stairs to the bottom of the stairs. And then you can say, yes, actually today he jumped off a brick wall straight onto the head's car bonnet. but just think about how you're actually having a conversation, because that walk of shame is really hard for a parent as well. And if you are a new practitioner, if you're feeling out of your depth or you're not too sure what you're seeing or what you're looking at, don't be ashamed to ask advice. There are other people out there that are going to be willing to help. Don't feel that because you've done your training that you've got to deal with it all on your own. Be prepared, because actually it helps you grow to be able to find out other people's thoughts as well.
Brilliant.
Hope that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's often practitioners, you're saying, perhaps sometimes rely or expect to rely too much on the parents for knowledge and for reporting, and you have to know the level of understanding the parent has as well, rather than just expecting them to have everything at their fingertips.
Well, that's what I was saying. If you are a parent, why should you know more than anybody else? And in fact, parents will have that expectations that practitioners have had training, so therefore they're going to be able to give advice. But it's actually working through it together and planning together and meeting together and being honest and open and chatting. And one of the ways that, if I've been working with a parent who has barriers, either that they don't want to know that their child might be having difficulties of some description, or that they don't want their child to be labelled in any way or form, then rather than actually having a conversation where I am facing a difficult situation with a parent, then sometimes I'll say, as a practitioner, can I just ask your advice on this situation that we've had? What do you reckon? What do you think we might be seeing? Not asking what we should be doing about it, but what do you think we might be seeing? And then the parent actually feels as though they're involved and they want to be involved because they want to improve things for their child, rather than the parent feeling that they are being judged as a bad parent for whatever behaviour you're seeing.
That's brilliant. That makes a lot of sense. I think maybe just to kind of finish up here at Nursery World, you're talking about autism spectrum disorder and enabling environments. Super interesting topic, I think. How should we maybe change our understanding of enabling environments when it comes to children with ASD? And how can we consider them more if we have children like that in our setting?
Yeah. I think that if you do an autism awareness training, then it will set you up and it will give you an understanding, but every single child is going to be an individual. So in 35 years, I've never come across a child who portrays in exactly the same way. So when you're thinking about the environment and setting them up in the environment, again, it goes back to needing to know more about that individual child. Really quick story, I was asked to go into a nursery environment where I'd got a child who wouldn't participate in any messy play whatsoever. And I went to do some observations, and I stood at the edge of the room, and I saw two children walking down, and as I did, I saw one child just bring his hand to his eyes as they came parallel with the messy play trays. So I thought, gosh, if that child's not even looking at the messy play, how am I going to get them engaged? But then within the environment, as I was observing, I noticed anything he chose to play with, whether he was picking up a book or a train, or whether he was doing Lego bricks, he would take them to the darkest area within the room. So the following day, I got the tray moved, because where the trays were, there was a window above them, and I got the trays moved into the darkest area of the room, and the following day he was up to his arms in sand and water, and it was nothing to do with the messy play at all. It was that he actually had a sensory sensitivity to the light coming through the window. So we need to actually observe children to hear their voice. And I know it's something I've repeated during this interview, but for me it's so important. How can we know our children when the child has very little in the form of their own voice, particularly if they're non-verbal? So to be able to support the environment, general concepts is make it clear, as in not clear of resources, but make it clear what the child is meant to be doing. So give them some rules and some boundaries, make things visual, work within the child's own framework. So have a look and see if the child is more of a visual learner or an audio learner, or a child who is a kinesthetic learner. Use those kind of tools to be able to help during transition. So it might be that a child is a kinesthetic learner and loves Duplo bricks. So to get from one room to another, give them a Duplo brick, and when they get into the other room, they can already put it onto a Duplo model that's there, so that there's a reason for going. So it's working with the child and using things that the child is interested in, rather than fighting against it just by actually deciding and planning your own environment and this is what we're doing, without making reasonable adjustments.